Okay, I'm going to get started with a short introduction of myself and the Greater Brookland Intergenerational Village, and then I will present or introduce our presenter tonight. So hello, everybody. My name is Nadia Mercer. I'm the Executive Director for Greater Brookland Intergenerational Village. And we are a village, and many of you probably are coming from villages of your own in your own neighborhoods. So thank you for being here. We are located in Ward 5. We have a similar mission to support older adults as we all age, and we do that through an intergenerational approach here in Brookland. And yeah, so we have many social and wellness programs and age well programs. And tonight, Russell is going to be speaking with us about hearing loss. So just a little quick word on the chat. If you do have a question, you can use the chat bubble, or you can write it down and wait till the end and ask yourself. Either one. Okay. And Russell is very open to hearing your questions and excited about that at the end. Okay, so I will, if anyone has any questions about Zoom, just let me know. I'm just going to keep going. We do have a function that I will share that does allow for captions. So the captions, you can turn them on if you do want closed captions, and that should be at the bottom of the screen. Maybe it's under more. And so you click more and then it should say captions. You click that and you're good to go. Okay. So our presenter tonight is Russell Misheloff. Russ is the past president of the Hearing Loss Association of America, the DC area chapter, and currently serves on the chapter's executive board. The chapter provides support to members and information on communication strategies and hearing assistive technology, as well as outreach and advocacy services for those living with hearing loss. Russ's hearing loss dates from the 90s and is of unknown origin. Like many others, he ignored his hearing loss for years until it became severe enough that it threatened his ability to continue functioning personally and socially. At that point, he was evaluated and received hearing aids. Subsequently, and with further deterioration in his hearing, especially in his right ear, he received a cochlear implant. He has his bachelor's degree in economics and a master's in international relations, respectively, from the University of Michigan and University of Pennsylvania, and for many years was employed by the U.S. Agency for International Development and by private firms planning and implementing international development work. So you have a very knowledgeable speaker with personal experience in this subject. So thank you so much for being here, Russ. I pass it to you.
Okay. Thank you, Nadia. I appreciate it, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to share a screen, and let's hope this works. It usually does. Okay, let's go.
And again, if you have any questions, you can write them down and ask them at the end, or put them in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Just by way of introduction, yes, as Nadia indicated, I am with the DC chapter of the Hearing Loss Association of America. The association, it's a national organization. It's headquartered in Rockville, comprised of approximately 130 local chapters nationwide, of which we are one, 16 state and local jurisdictions within that framework, as well. Its purpose, is to, as it says, to open the world of communication to people with hearing loss through information, advocacy, and support. And the DC chapter we're one of 130 or so, and obviously one of the best. We do pretty much similar sorts of things at a local level. We provide a comfortable and informal environment for people to exchange experiences, and we learn from each other, in that way, and provide hearing support, including information about hearing technology, captioning, advocacy for captioning in public places, compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay. Just a word. Well, this is what we're going to talk about, tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the signs and impacts of hearing loss. As it indicates, hearing loss is not an obvious disability. It's invisible, and people are often reluctant to talk about it. And so the signs and the signs are not necessarily obvious. How one lives well with hearing loss through use of hearing devices, effective communication strategies, a variety of tips, that we find are helpful, for home and in common social situations. We stress very much self-advocacy in particular because this is an invisible disability. And if you're not willing, and able, to advocate on your own behalf, people will not recognize, the disability you have, and really will not, necessarily know how best to be of help to you. And we'll talk a little bit as well as about ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, regulations and guidance, and a little bit about where, you can find help when you need it. Who has hearing loss? Well, as this indicates, a lot of people do. The figure of $48.1 million, excuse me, not dollars, 48.1 million people in this country is probably a little dated. It's probably a little higher than that. It figures about 10 years old or so. And in the intervening period, the population has increased some. And there's no reason to believe that the percentage of people, with hearing loss has gone down. So the figure of 48.1 million, as high as that may be, is probably something of an understatement. The percentages are probably pretty accurate. And what they indicate, of course, is that hearing loss progresses with advanced age, beginning with actually very, very few people are born. Two or three in 1,000 are born with hearing loss. But even at young ages, it's still fairly low. But it does become a significant issue with the advancement of age. Okay, the one thing that this doesn't show, and which is important, is that not only does the percentage of people with hearing loss increase with age, the severity of the loss which they experience also becomes greater with age. One of the common forms of hearing loss, so-called sensorineural hearing loss, which we'll talk a little bit about later, is progressive. Very often it will begin at ages 20, 25, 30, or in the 30s, possibly in the 40s. It'll begin at very mild levels and will progress, over time and become more severe with the as time goes on. My own hearing loss was first observed when I was probably about 45 or so. At the time, I was told, well, we could put you on a hearing aid, if you wish. It's strictly your call. it was mild at that point. Within 5 or 6 years of that point, it became severe enough that it became a problem for me both socially and professionally. And I did get hearing aids, at that point. A lot of misconceptions about hearing loss. First of all, that it's a problem only for the elderly. And as the chart, which I just showed a moment ago, indicates, about half of people, the 48 million or whatever that actual number is, of people with hearing loss are 65 years old or younger. So yes, it does increase with age, but no, it is not a problem only for the elderly. Secondly, like aging, hearing loss can't be helped. That may have been the case at some point in the past. It is nevertheless, it continues to be believed by a lot of people, including, unfortunately, some doctors. It is no longer the case. Most forms of hearing loss can be helped, with the aid of hearing aids, other devices, good communication strategies, and in some cases they can be helped, medically or surgically, depending upon the cause, of the hearing loss. Third, there's a perception that people with hearing loss are not very bright or very nice. And that's understandable when you think about, well, sometimes we don't hear what people are asking us. We don't respond at all, or we respond to a question which has already been answered, or our response is somehow inappropriate within the context of the conversation. I mean, this is all due to the fact that we can very easily miss what we're hearing, misinterpret what we're hearing. It doesn't mean that we're nasty people. I like to assume that we're, as a group, we're at least as nice as other people. Maybe that's being selfish, but I think it is the case. Some more misconceptions. Everyone with hearing loss uses sign language. Actually, very few people do. Sign language is generally used by people who were born with hearing loss and grew up, learning sign language as young children in the same way that kids with normal hearing learn to speak and to communicate orally. I can't tell you, however, how widespread this misconception is. I have been on many occasions in public venues and public performances and public settings, advise people that I had a hearing loss and was told, no problem, we'll get you an interpreter. Well, that's nice, but is not of any particular help to me, and is not of any particular help to the large majority of people who have some degree of hearing impairment. Secondly, shout and you'll be heard. That's a very common misperception. Shouting obviously makes things louder. It doesn't necessarily make things clearer. And sometimes it does precisely the reverse. And it distorts your face. So it makes it harder to interpret the mood of the person, who is asking, who is speaking. And thirdly, that hearing aids and cochlear implants restore normal hearing. These are very, very useful, miraculous devices. Without them, I take out my hearing aid and my cochlear implant before I go to bed. And for all practical purposes, I hear nothing. So they're very, very useful, but it is an exaggeration and, to note, to say that they restore normal hearing. They do not. Recognition, denial, and avoidance. Only a small portion of people who need hearing aids are actually using them. You'll notice there is a wide, range here, and that's basically a function of a couple of things. First of all, sampling people is difficult. Secondly, people don't very often, as we'll say in just a second, will basically tell you that they don't have a hearing loss when in fact they do. That may be an honest perception. They don't hear certain things, but they don't know that they're not hearing certain things. Their hearing loss in that case is probably quite mild. But generally we say it's not recognized because there's only a gradual onset and is it mild at the initial stages. It's also the case, however, that people may recognize themselves that they've got something of a hearing problem, but the last thing they want to do is to talk about it. There's a lot of denial. There's a lot of avoidance. There's lots of excuses. I don't have a problem. I hear pretty well in some settings. And that's true. People with mild and even moderate hearing loss are probably in quiet settings able to do all right. They're not able to do all right in some other settings. Other denial mechanisms, people today mumble, not like they did when I was a kid. I don't think that's the case. People speak softly or too fast. Of course, some do, but I don't know that that's, a widespread problem. And lastly, nothing can be done about hearing loss, as we indicated a moment ago. That may have been the case at one point. It certainly is not today. So the other question is, well, why do people go to such lengths to deny that they have a hearing loss and to avoid their problem? And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, there's a widespread stigma attached to hearing loss. We don't want to stand out. We don't want to look old. I think probably that stigma is being reduced in some cases, in some sense, just because these days people walk around with all kinds of things in their ears. And the fact that with hearing aids, you have something in your ears is not as unusual and people may not even recognize, what they are. It's also people avoid it because the hearing aids are expensive and they may be inconvenient to get them. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later on when we talk a little bit about newly introduced over-the-counter hearing aids, which are made, one, to make the hearing aids a little less expensive and less inconvenient to procure. Although people do, as indicated a moment ago, not recognize they have a hearing loss or avoid the implications of their hearing loss, treatment is important. A lot of good research studies have linked untreated hearing loss to withdrawal from social situations, resulting in isolation, loneliness, fatigue, stress, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, and even dementia. And that as well, I'll have another slide in just a moment or two. And even mild hearing loss raises the problems that these things refer to. There are other hearing issues, other health issues that untreated hearing loss is associated with, including diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. I'm not sure of what that connection is, but certainly the research indicates that yes, that they are linked. That doesn't mean that one causes the other. It doesn't mean that hearing loss causes these, or on the other hand, it doesn't mean that the presence of diabetes or cardiovascular diseases increases your risk of hearing aids. They may both be associated with some other common cause. The importance of early recognition and treatment. With mild hearing loss, the risk of dementia over time doubles. With moderate hearing loss, it triples. With severe hearing loss, it increases by a factor of 5. It's fairly dramatic, and that's why I've indicated the source of the research. This is Johns Hopkins. Frank Lin is an eminent PhD hearing doctor and hearing loss specialist. I should also, in the interest of full disclosure, tell you that my hearing loss is severe in my left ear and profound in my right. So that may suggest that basically I have dementia and everything I'm telling you is total nonsense. I don't think that's the case, but as I say, in the interest of full disclosure, I thought I would mention that. The easiest thing to do if you have any suspicion that you have a hearing problem, or even if you don't, is to get screened. These are very, very easy tests. They take just a few minutes. They'll test how well you hear, or let me put it this way, how loud a sound needs to be, measured in decibels at various frequencies or pitches for you to hear them. And you either pass or fail. And if you pass, there's probably nothing else you need to do other than get tested again periodically later, or screened again periodically later. And if you fail, there's an evidence of some hearing problem, and you need more testing to indicate whether you have a hearing loss, and if so, how severe it is and what type it is. And as lastly indicated, is useful for everyone to get periodically screened or tested, because hearing loss is often progressive. People often do not recognize they have a hearing loss or underestimate its severity. And what I didn't tell you, hearing screenings are actually widely available. They're very often available for nothing at health fairs. Lions Club provides them. Other organizations that provide them, generally in association with some public events, and they're almost always free. Okay, you suspect you have a hearing loss? It's time to talk to a professional. There are two types, that we generally recognize. The ear, nose, and throat doctors, also called ENTs or otolaryngologists, a more technical term that I've been using for 10 or 15 years and still mispronounce regularly. And their purpose is basically to rule out that your hearing loss is associated, there's a medical condition that is behind your hearing loss. Or you can consult with an audiologist or a hearing aid specialist, and they'll give you a full hearing evaluation, and if indicated, advice on choosing a hearing aid, advice on other hearing technology and communication strategies, and they may refer you to an ENT or other specialist if there is evidence or suspicion that there is a medical problem associated with your hearing loss. Can you skip a visit to an audiologist? Until a few months ago, the answer to that question was no. If you wanted a hearing aid, if you thought you had a problem, that was about the only thing you can do. Now we have, as effective in October of 2022, the introduction on the market of over-the-counter hearing aids. They're available, they're being rolled out, in a lot of big box stores, some pharmacies, other organizations as well. They're designed for people with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. They're generally less expensive than hearing aids procured through an audiologist. And FDA, as the Federal Drug Administration regulations, provide some assurance that their quality is good and that they are safe, for your use. There are a few qualifications to that, but we may get into that. But that's generally, I think, fairly accurate. So, yes, you can skip seeing an audiologist. Our advice is don't. Why? For a couple reasons. As I already indicated, hearing loss is often progressive, and you need a baseline so that you know what's happening to your hearing, over time. Secondly, in the early stages, your hearing loss may not be recognized at all, where it's mild, but yet it is important that you address it for reasons that we talked about, some of the health implications and some of the social implications of hearing loss, even at mild levels. Then you want to rule out that there's a medical problem or address it if there is one. And lastly, you may need some help in reaching a good decision about choosing what kind of technology you need for your hearing loss. What kind of technology, what kind of communication strategies. I first very often hear the false analogy between buying reading glasses and getting an over-the-counter hearing aid. They're not the same in a couple of ways. First of all, sight, the process of seeing is actually much simpler than the process of hearing. You can go to to CVS, try on reading glasses. They'll give you a little chart. And if you can read the chart, and it looks fairly comfortable, yeah, you can buy them and they cost you $20 or so. And they probably will be suitable for you. It's not so easy in the case of hearing loss. There are different types of hearing loss, there are different severities of hearing loss, there are different technologies and communication strategies appropriate for different kinds of hearing loss. And even over-the-counter hearing loss are a lot more expensive than reading glasses from the CVS. If you visit an audiologist, what to expect? They'll start with an interview, or they should, in which they talk to you. They want to find out about the challenges you have, your hopes and fears. They want to find out about whether you have any indication of a medical problem. What this indicates is that you've got, in visiting an audiologist, you want to think about a little bit about your own situation. What kinds of difficulties are you having? General conversation, TV, children's voices, telephone conversations. Telephone is difficult because telephones are basically designed so that, basically, if you can hear about 60% of what they're saying, you can basically figure out what you're missing or what you didn't actually hear. Which is basically saying the quality of the audiology in most telephone receivers is not especially good. You have difficulty in social activities like family gatherings. Noise is a major issue for people with hearing loss. And do you have any preferences with respect to the size of the hearing aids, the appearance of the hearing aids? There are a variety of different kinds. Excuse me. Think also about, where you're having responsibilities, meetings, open, noisy environments, teleconferences. Do you have an occupation-related concern? Use the example here of musicians, which have a unique need for information to hear, including at frequencies which aren't really within the range of speech. Okay. The outcome of a visit to an audiologist is typically an audiogram, which you should get a copy of. And if indicated, strategies for living with your hearing loss, recommendations for a hearing aid or other devices, communication strategies, and referral to an ENT or other medical specialist if there is an indication that there is a medical problem lying behind your hearing loss. In the majority of cases, that is not the case, but it is in some. Hearing aids. And this applies whether they're purchased through an audiologist or over the counter. These are devices which should be programmed for you and you alone. They amplify sound. They typically include features or some of the features which reduce surrounding and noise, improve understanding over the telephone, conduct to various sound sources. They may be Bluetooth enabled, so you can pair your hearing aid with sources of sound, and they're very useful for that, for that in mind. They're great, but they have limitations. And without additional functional devices designed to extend their functionality, they're not going to work very well to overcome noisy environments. Even hearing aids that have directional mics generally pick up more of the noise than you want to hear. Directional mics are typically designed to emphasize sound that's coming from in front of you. And the reason is fairly clear. The theory is that if you're talking to someone, you're probably talking to someone you can see in front of you. So they'll try to suppress some of the, noise or other sounds coming from the sides and from the back. I have to say, however, that they're not really all that good. They do some good in that respect, but no, they don't overcome all the noise. All the things that you don't want to hear, you may hear anyway, and that may be a problem. Hearing aids will not overcome distance. If you're in the back of an auditorium and there's a speaker in the front without good amplification, you may be having a good deal of trouble hearing what that person is saying. They don't provide you with a good directional sense for a sound source. Where is that ambulance that I hear? My wife is always concerned when I go out, as I do, for walks, because I don't have a very good sense of direction. And she's always concerned to me that I'm going to get hit by a car coming from behind me that I just didn't recognize. I don't think it's going to happen, but okay, I appreciate the concern. And hearing aids don't eliminate echoes in hard surface rooms. So there are things that they do. And lastly, I should say, they don't overcome difficult accents. Difficult accents basically just means accents that you're not familiar with. And that's why we have hearing assistive technology. They're basically designed to do some of the things that hearing aids are not designed to do. There are many kinds and choices, and what you elect to buy depends upon, your own particular requirements and your own particular hearing loss. Those are for personal use. For televisions, they'll amplify sound, or they'll deliver the sound directly to your hearing aid. There are phone connection supports. There's phones that can be amplified. There are phone connections that will transcribe the what is said in the conversation into text, which appears on a screen. There are neck loops you can get, which I'll talk a little bit, I think, about that later. There's small microphones that you can use. This one over here that I have, I'm using it, although don't find in this particular environment that it's particularly necessary. It's basically a Bluetooth microphone, and it basically amplifies, and more than amplifies, it sends the sound directly to my hearing aid. And for large auditoriums and other public spaces, there are FM systems, which basically transmit sound through radio signals. There are infrared systems, which transmit sound through the air. they're good systems. Their only limitation, and actually in some cases it's an advantage, is they won't go through walls. There has to be a clear line of sight between the source of the sound and the person trying to hear the sound for an infrared system, to work. And lastly, but certainly not least, well, the two last things. Yeah, how can there be two last things? Yeah, there's also captions. We're providing captions here for this program. Captions can be provided in auditoriums, of course, as well. And there are loops. A loop is basically it's an info, it's a system that basically transmits sounds through a small wire that encircles the perimeter, of the facility, and is picked up by a device in your hearing aid, some call a telecoil, which actually majority of hearing aids have, not all. Or it can be picked up, that can be an external loop receiver, which the facility will make available to people upon request. Besides technology, personal communication strategies are important. It's important, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again. It's worth saying again. It's important that you advocate for yourself. People will look at you and they will have no indication that you have a disability, that you have a problem. You need basically not only to tell them that you've got a problem, but also to tell them a little bit about what they can do to be of help. Most people are willing to be of help if they only knew how, and they don't necessarily know unless you tell them. Tell them that they need to face you. Don't turn away. Tell them to speak at a moderate rate. They may need to slow down a little bit. Don't ask that they don't shout and that they repeat, or better rephrase when you ask for, rephrase what they're saying if you ask for it. They repeat, you may hear it a second time, or you may not. There may be something in the particular word structure that they've used, and you can repeat it 10 times and you still won't hear it. Admit when you don't hear. I say this, and we're all guilty of this. Don't bluff. It doesn't work very well, and it can be embarrassing. It's embarrassing when you nod your head and smile, and then you're asked a question and you have no idea really what's been asked. That's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when you think you've heard the question, but you've misheard it, and your answer is therefore not quite what was expected. And lastly, and I say this is don't bluff, but most of us do from time to time, just basically because, particularly in groups, hearing is difficult, it's exhausting, and after a while, I think we relate, we get into bad habits, put it that way. Communication strategies, be patient. The habits of your communication partners have been built up over many years, and they are very hard to change. You may need to request that people speak a little more at moderate pace, face you when they speak, don't put their hands in front of their face, take off their face mask if they can. Face masks are a real problem for people with hearing loss. But as I said, people have been using developed their own communication strategies, their own patterns, if you will, over many years. And for the most part, they've worked pretty well. They're not easy to change. You may need to repeat your requests for accommodations often. And as I say, asking people to rephrase what you didn't hear is better than repeating. And if they change the subject, give you a few clues of that, because particularly in group settings, that happens regularly. Accept the world will not fully adopt your hearing loss. Consider changes to improve communications at home and the workplace. Carpeting, draperies, acoustic tile. accessories to better hear a television, personal microphones, assistive hearing, alerting devices. I have a device which acts as a wake-up call. I mean, I can't hear a typical alarm system, a wake-up system or a radio. But if I have a little device that basically I put under my pillow and it'll vibrate the pillow when it's time for me to wake up. It's not a bad way. I mean, nobody likes hearing. Nobody likes to be awakened from a sound sleep. It's not really a bad way to be awakened. It's not really a terrible thing. Telephones are a problem. You can get amplified phones. You can get captioned phones. You can get speech to text apps on a smartphone. I use one. They're actually quite effective. They're not 100% accurate, but they're generally pretty good. You can get a neck loop, which is basically looping yourself in the same way that rooms can be looped. You just stick it around your head, and it will transcript sounds, directly, to a neck loop. You can use Bluetooth to connect your cell phones to your hearing aids. It's very nice to be able to do that. Smartphone messaging capability is terrific for people with hearing loss. It enables, almost real-time communications with a partner without affecting, without being a problem for people, with hearing loss. And there are also, hearing aids compatible smartphones. Most cell phones, smartphones now are hearing aid compatible, but you're still, I think, better off with amplified phones, with speech to text apps. There are, incidentally, the speech to text apps, which are pretty good, are all free. I mean, you have to set them up, but they're not very difficult, at all to do. TV and home stereos, virtually all, first of all televisions made after 1993 have the capability of captions. You have to turn them on. For some televisions, it's a little more complicated than others, but they all have them. And certainly, if you don't know how to do it, you ought to be able to talk to, the people in the store in which you bought it or the manufacturer. They ought to be able to tell you exactly how to turn them on. You can loop a TV listening area. I've done that. The advantage of doing that is that it doesn't require that you have the volume on the television turned to anything below muted, because you're not hearing through the mic. You're hearing directly, from the system. So I've looped the television room, and I can go into the room. I can watch television with the sound muted so that it doesn't bother anybody. You can use devices like the a mini mic, like the one I have. You just put that near the audio output area, and it will do what it says. It will amplify. And obviously headphones, good as well. Tips for a restaurant: lighting. Pick a well-lit area. Ask for a quiet section. It's easier said than done. A restaurant is crowded, and so, the quiet section you may not necessarily find particularly quiet. Face the person you may want to talk to most. Go at off-peak hours. Write out specials. Bring a pen and paper. If it's still too noisy, you might want to pick another time or another restaurant. Some are better than others. Movies and theaters, closed captioning devices are often provided. You have to ask for them. They're typically devices that provide, they're generally devices that have a neck, you put it into a cup holder along the seat, and you can look at the screen and get a text, as the movie progresses. Better are open caption showings. Open captions is basically means it's the captions are on screen. Just as you get English versions of foreign language speech. It's much better because it doesn't mean you can look at the screen. With the closed captioning devices, you have the choice of looking at the screen or looking at the device, and or your head goes from one to another, and the devices don't always work. Looping is available. I think looping is available in some area performances. Actually, I'm not totally convinced of that, but there are other devices that some theaters provide. Signature Theater in Arlington, I think, what do you call it in the district? Arena Stage uses Gala Pro, which is a system, which a lot of the theaters in New York use, which you can use on the, which is an app on your phone. I don't much like them for the same reason I don't like closed caption devices in the movies. Because if I go to a theater, I want to look at the performance. I don't want to be looking at my phone. And, it's difficult to do both simultaneously. Check the devices provided, particularly the closed captioning devices. Theaters generally have them. They don't always keep them well serviced. Batteries are typically a problem. Over-the-counter hearing aids. Just a little bit about these. What are they? They are, first of all, hearing aids. As such, that means they are regulated medical devices with regulations cleared by the Federal Drug Administration. They are safe and they are effective. And within some limits, over-the-counter hearing aids can be reprogrammed as your hearing loss changes. And like hearing aids procured through an audiologist, they may include a variety of optional features, including directional mics, noise reduction, telecoils, Bluetooth capability. They are not PSAPs. PSAPs that's an acronym for Personal Sound Amplification Products. These devices have been on the market for many years. They're sold widely. They cannot, although they resemble hearing aids and they use technologies which are similar to hearing aids, they are not hearing aids and cannot be sold to people for purposes of treating hearing loss, which is not to say that people don't necessarily, some people have bought them for that purpose. It's not a very well policed regulation. They're generally designed for people with normal hearing who, for one reason or another, in some circumstances, want to have especially acute hearing. Hunters, for example, I think are the classic example that's used. But don't mistake them for hearing aids because they are not designed for you. They may over-amplify. They may, for you, be precisely wrong, and they can be dangerous. Some of them are not, but some of them may be. Are they right for you? Well, they're designed for people with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. Some definitions there. Perceived by whom? Perceived by you. No testing is required. if you somehow think you've got a mild to moderate hearing loss, you can go into a big box store and buy an over-the-counter hearing aid. Most people with hearing loss, maybe 90%, maybe even more, have a rather mild hearing loss. And if that is the case, yes, an over-the-counter hearing aid may be quite appropriate for them. But as I indicated, it's better to get tested. It's better to get tested for a couple of reasons. First of all, people, as we indicated, deny that they don't recognize they have a hearing loss. Very often we find that if you ask people about the severity of their hearing loss, most of the time, majority of people will underestimate their hearing loss. It's usually more severe than they will tell you. How do you know whether your hearing loss then is mild to moderate? Well, you don't have to go to an audiologist, but you should get tested. They use soundproof booths, calibrated equipment. The results are generally pretty good. You can self-test, and some of the manufacturers of over-the-counter hearing aids are going to provide programs that you can use online, or they'll tell you how to use them. They may be okay. They're not as good because for one reason, it's difficult to control the testing environment. You can't put yourself in a soundproof room. Or maybe you can, but it's unlikely that you're going to do that. Some clues about about your hearing. If you have a problem with group conversations, use of a phone, if you need to turn the volume of a hearing loss, of a television up. If you ask people with great regularity to repeat or to rephrase what they've said, the odds are you've probably got a problem. And I guess the first person who will tell you, at least in my case, the first person who recognized I had a hearing loss or was willing to say I have a hearing loss was my wife. Took me a little while beyond that point where she had told me I had a hearing loss that I was willing to acknowledge it. Bottom line, visit an audiologist before acquiring a hearing aids. It's no longer required, but it's a good idea. Get an accurate measure of your hearing, and an audiogram for baseline records provides assurance that your hearing loss is not the result of a medical problem. It'll tell you also about the severity of your hearing loss. It'll also tell you a little bit about the cause of your hearing loss and whether there is a medical problem involved. Looking ahead, some possible impacts of over-the-counter hearing aids. Likely to be an increase in the number of providers. The 95 to 98% of the hearing aid market has basically been satisfied by 6 providers, 6 manufacturers. It is likely that some of the organizations, some of the companies that are into consumer electronics are going to go into making over-the-counter hearing aids. I think that is already happening in some cases. And so you're also, I think, because of you're going to get more competition, more people involved, more manufacturers, I think you're also going to get more in innovation. You're going to get things that are being discovered and put into devices that are not currently there. Change in the function of audiologists. Many audiologists now basically sell hearing aids and service the hearing aids they sell. I think some of them are certainly amenable to the notion that they may be needed by people who buy or are interested in over-the-counter hearing aids, but need support. It is likely that with increased competition over time, prices of hearing aids, including hearing aids bought through an audiologist, are likely to go down. And most importantly, because the price will go down, because the convenience of getting hearing help will increase, you're going to have care for many people who need hearing help but aren't getting it. This gets back to what I was mentioning well at the beginning. Only a small portion of people who can benefit from hearing aids are currently using hearing aids. I think this will help over time to lessen that problem. I've listed here some sources. I can make this, I mean, I can make this presentation available. Then you don't have to madly copy down anything, but there are a variety of sources. And there's also, of course, the Hearing Loss Association of America and our chapter, which I think we're pretty good. I was first asked when I had a contact with Brookland Village, whether I would do a program on over-the-counter hearing aids. They're new. We did a program recently for one of the other, probably for Capitol Hill Village. And I was sort of asked whether I could repeat that. In conversations, though, it began, it seemed to me, and I think there was agreement that, yeah, people may have interest in over-the-counter hearing aids, but they also had other questions and other interests, which suggested a more general presentation, such as what I've tried to do tonight. But now I guess there's a question of whether or not it makes sense to do a program on over-the-counter hearing aids, a different program, whether it makes sense to do another program on aspects of hearing loss that we've only sort of glanced through here in very summary fashion. And I'm going to leave that, I'm going to leave that to you. That's not a question. And so, but in any event, I'll open it to questions either from the chat box, or if you want to just, not a very large group, I don't think. I guess what first, Nadia, I think probably what we ought to do is to end the screening, so that I can.
Great. I will turn it off.
If you would, I'd appreciate that. Whoa, here, stop share. I can do this myself.
Great.
Yeah, I can. That was easy. All right. I mean, let me open this to, to questions. I should have, I don't know, I guess I can first thing I guess I can do is open the chat box.
Yeah. Would you like me to?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay, there's one in here right now, Russell. Thank you for all that information. This is from Laura and Carlos. Are there any captioning devices for meetings where there are a lot of people with hearing loss? I'm thinking of devices that could pick up the conversation and flash it on a screen through a projector as text.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that in a fashion similar to what we're doing here. Providing captions, for, and this, this is a relatively small group, but, it could be 10 times the size and we would do this precisely the same thing. In a large auditorium, yeah, I mean, you can put captions on a screen. There's no reason why you can't do that. You can, yeah, the other, we talked about some of the other forms, which in large auditoriums, you can enable people with hearing loss to do better. FM systems work very well. Infrared systems work well. Looped rooms, there are some Some of the library facilities in the district are looped now. The auditoriums now, are looped. So, and we have, before the pandemic, our chapter meetings were generally done at looped facilities. Yeah, and they exist in some other venues as well. There will be, looking to the future, they're developing Bluetooth in a fashion that it will enable you to do, people, in public venues to do that. Something which is called, Orocast, which will enable that. And will be terrific, when it happens. But I suspect that's still some years away. Nadia, before we go on, I seem to still have the screen share on. I thought I had turned it off.
You did. We don't see it anymore.
I do. That's a good point.
I wonder.
Well, okay, it's not that important.
You don't see us.
The only one I see on a very small screen is me. And
Let me see if I can fix that for you.
if you can't, it's not that terribly, not really terribly important. Now I see you on the same small
Okay.
screen.
Is that better? At least you're not talking to yourself.
It's a question, how do I maximize that speed?
I think if you click the grid on the top right, it says view.
Chat now, thing that she changed.
Oh, yeah.
And
Thank you
then
for,
hit gallery.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't, all I see is a very small your face and very little else. I don't see anything around you.
Oh,
It's not that terribly important. I mean, for one thing, I can read the captions.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about cochlear implants? I have hearing loss, severe hearing loss starting when I was a child, and I have hearing aids, but I have never considered cochlear implants. When to consider that, and how does it work?
I would talk to your audiologist about that.
Okay.
I started out with 2 hearing aids, and the hearing loss in my right ear progressed more than in my left. And it reached the point where at a certain point, my audiologist said, I can sell you another hearing aid, but frankly, it's a waste of your money. I don't think I can do much for you. Given the severity of the loss in your right ear, I can do much. And it was at that point that I began to look into getting a cochlear implant. And, a year or so later, I did. But I would look into, it does involve, it involves surgery.
Right.
It is not always, the surgery is minor. I mean, there's rather little pain involved, but it is surgery. It takes it is a very different way of hearing, and your brain does need to get used to it. That may take a couple months, and it may take some good oral rehabilitation work. I was lucky enough to glom on to that, but they usually work over time. And in my case, I guess my feeling was, I'm not sure I have anything to lose. I can't hear much out of my right ear anyway. It will either work and be very useful, or it won't work and I won't be any the worse off from where I am now. And it turns out it actually worked out quite well. I don't know if I answered your question very well.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, that's
yeah, I have a question. Yeah, thank you for a great presentation. To what extent tinnitus or tinnitus aggravates hearing loss, and what is the best way to cope with this hearing loss, which is combined with tinnitus or tinnitus?
I'm not sure I quite got that.
I would repeat it, but I'm not sure I did either.
Maybe your audio.
Ca-
Um,
Can you repeat that and just talk
Yes.
slower, please?
Yeah. To what extent tinnitus or tinnitus aggravates hearing loss, and what is the best way to cope with it?
I'm sorry, what you're asking about is tinnitus?
Yes.
Yeah, basically, again, I would talk to your audiologist. Hearing aids, some hearing aids are made in a fashion that they will mask tinnitus. They usually do it by introducing white noise. It's not a cure for tinnitus. And so far as I'm aware, there isn't any known cure for tinnitus. It comes in various forms, various severities, and no one has yet cured it. But they do make hearing aids, to mask it. And some people find that effective. I'm lucky in the respect that I don't have it.
And that's that's when you have a high pitched sound in your ears.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, it is often high pitch, but it's not necessarily high pitch. It is basically noise for which there doesn't seem to be any external source. It's one of those mysteries that has never been, well, like all mysteries haven't been resolved, or there wouldn't be mysteries. Go ahead.
Okay, we have questions in the chat, but
Any.
where can I find ratings of local audiologists?
Nowhere, to be honest. Where can you find ratings of any medical provider? Well, the Washingtonian says best doctors of various sorts. I suspect they're mainly advertisements.
Someone wrote,
I think your best bet, I can say two things. Talk to friends who have been audiologists, and they'll tell you whether they like their audiologist. I like my audiologist. I don't want to ever put in a plug. If we, offline at some point, if you want to ask me the question, you're welcome to email me or say, I'll tell you who my audiologist is. The other option is to go to an academic facility. Gallaudet, George Washington, Georgetown. And the reason I say that is that it is likely that you will get a more objective viewpoint. Some audiologists are basically connected with one or two of the hearing aid manufacturers. And even if they try to be objective, I think they are probably influenced by their associations. That's less likely to be the case at an academic institution. And you'll probably get pretty good service.
okay. You mentioned regular screenings are advisable. Does that typically mean annually?
Annually is not bad. Every few years, I think, yes, you should certainly do it. It's easy to do. Screenings are very easy to do. I mean, I say they take about 5 minutes or so. Going to an audiologist is a little bit more complicated, but every couple of years, it's probably worth it. Yeah, I mean, typically, the most common form of hearing loss, so-called sensorineural hearing loss, which basically means either deterioration in the hair cells in the cochlea or in the auditory nerve. And that probably accounts for probably 80% of people, with hearing loss. It's very often progressive. And yeah, you do want to get retested. Mine, at the age of 45, my hearing loss was mild. It's certainly not mild now. It has progressed even in my left ear considerably. Yeah, so certainly at least every couple of years.
Okay, another question in the chat is, can you talk a little more about the research linking hearing loss with dementia?
Your best bet is to go, I think I put the source on that slide. And you're welcome to the, to the presentation, the slides on the presentation, which will include that. And basically the source that I was quoting from was work done by Frank Lynn at Johns Hopkins. And it's good testing. They were very sophisticated in doing it. And they didn't rely on people telling them what their hearing loss was, how severe their hearing was. They did testing. And they basically found fairly close associations between people with untreated hearing loss, even on mild levels, and increased occurrence of cognitive decline and even dementia. But yeah, I would take a look at that slide, and it will give you a source.
Okay, I pasted into the chat a link for ZocDoc. I did a quick search on audiologists using ZocDoc.com, ZocDoc.com, and found some local audiologists and ratings.
Okay, I can't either attest for the validity or the objectivity or deny that it's subjective. Maybe it is.
They say that they're patient-only reviews.
Yeah. Consumer Reports, I think at one point tried to do something. I confess I don't remember very much about it.
Can you tell me how when you had the cochlear implant, you said that it was a very different way of hearing. Can you describe what that was like?
Yeah, and I have to, in telling you that, I have to say that people's experience differs considerably.
Sure.
Typically what's done is they'll do the surgery, they'll give you, I don't know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks for it to heal. I mean, the surgery basically implants the implanted portion, but there's an external processor. And they'll give you that, after, some 3-4 weeks of healing, and they'll attach the processor. What I remember was they had me take out my hearing aid because they wanted me to describe what I was hearing through the implant. Well, what I was hearing through the implant was noise. I did not even recognize that what I was hearing was my audiologist talking to me. I only knew that after I put my hearing aid back in. I will say, however, that within the course of, I would say, 3, 4, 5 days, I don't remember exactly, I started picking out words on television or from my wife. And I began to recognize, beginning to recognize, yes, speech and what was being said. At that point, I got myself involved, and I did it as a volunteer in a research program at Gallaudet. They were testing some oral rehabilitation work for people newly implanted, which is rather nice because it enabled me to have a one-to-one relationship with a very good audiologist at no cost. And we've developed a friendship. We're still friends. And it did me a lot of good. There are also a lot of over-the-counter, and you can buy apps. You know, you can buy programs that do the same thing. Some of them are actually, I guess they're pretty good, but they do require an awful lot of self-discipline. They're very detailed, they're lengthy. I got very tired of them very quickly. But some people do fine with them. But yeah, you need some of that. And I can't say if you don't do any of that, will you not be able to eventually use your cochlear implant successfully? I don't know that that's the case, but I suspect that you're much better off with the oral rehabilitation work, because it is a totally different way, to hear.
Okay, thank you. There are no more questions in the chat. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, I guess not. After this, I will email, well, once I get the presentation from Russell, I will share it with everyone via email, as well as the recording of this presentation. I will give you Russell's contact information, and I will share with you a short survey. We are also interested if there is anyone in the group tonight who would like to participate in a focus group. Russell is willing to hear your questions and do some more investigation to prepare another presentation that's more focused. So that question will be proposed to you in my follow-up email, and you can just reply to me if that's something you'd like to participate in. Okay, well, thank you so much, Russell. This was very, very helpful.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun, at least for me. I hope useful for you.
Yes. Thank you. Well, have a wonderful night, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.